Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into C.G. Jung's mesmerizing exploration of the human psyche. If you've ever found yourself wondering why the exact same myths, the same symbols, and even the same weird dreams just spontaneously pop up across totally disconnected cultures all throughout history, well, you are in the exact right place. We're going to decode one of the most fascinating psychological frameworks ever put together, and honestly, it might just fundamentally change how you view yourself.
But before we take the plunge, think about this for a second. Are your thoughts truly your own, or are they actually echoes of ancient humanity? See, we so often walk through the world feeling entirely isolated in our own subjective bubble. We kind of like to think of our minds as this private, locked-up domain, a solitary island, right? But as we're going to see today, the deepest layers of your mind might not belong to you alone. Actually, they might connect you to literally every human being who has ever lived.
All right, let's look at the foundational text where this all comes from. In Volume 9 of his collected works, which was beautifully translated by R.F.C. Hull, Jung rigorously maps out the unseen forces shaping human behavior. And to really get what he's arguing here, we have to start by completely throwing out and redefining what the word unconscious actually means. So we first have to distinguish between two entirely different layers of the mind. On one hand, you've got the personal unconscious. Freud famously argued this is essentially a storage space. It's a repository for your forgotten memories, your repressed personal stuff, and those private complexes. But beneath all that, Jung introduces something way more radical, the collective unconscious. This is a deep, universal layer that we all inherit. You don't acquire it through your own personal life experience, it's strictly inborn. It acts as a common psychic substrate, basically an underlying biological foundation that is absolutely identical in all human beings, no matter where or when they happen to live. Which brings us to the crucial point. This collective layer, it's populated by what Jung calls archetypes. Now, these are archaic, universal images that form the absolute bedrock of our shared human experience. Think of them almost like biological instincts, or maybe like ancient software pre-installed on the human hard drive. But instead of dictating physical reflexes, like pulling your hand away from a hot stove, they dictate patterns of thought, emotion, and imagination. They're this immediate, raw datum of psychic experience that just hasn't been processed, filtered, or tamed by our conscious, waking brain yet. They just exist within us, waiting for something to trigger them.
Now, take a look at how an archetype evolves. It goes from a dangerous, raw psychological force into a safe, conscious myth, or even a religious dogma. At first, an archetype is totally raw, chaotic, and completely unconscious. It's just too overwhelming to look at directly. So humans naturally projected outward into myths and fairy tales to try and make sense of it, giving it characters and a neat narrative. And finally, over centuries, it gets highly structured into esoteric teachings and formal religious dogmas. Those dogmas actually act as protective walls. They allow us to interact with these massive, overwhelming forces of the psyche safely and constructively. For millennia, early humans projected these intense inner psychic dramas onto the outer world, onto the sun, the moon, the stars. They were completely unaware that the origin of these grandiose myths actually lived right inside their own souls. It's a deeply profound realization when you really sit with it. As Jung notes, early humanity simply didn't realize that the psyche is an acting, suffering subject with its very own epic inner drama. Instead, they watch that drama play out in the changing of the seasons, the raging of storms, and the distant, swirling paths of the constellations. But as history marched on, specifically through the Reformation and the rapid rise of the scientific intellect, a massive shift happened. We systematically dismantled the sacred images and dogmas that used to protect us. As this sort of crude, awakening reason began clashing with those ancient symbols, we tore down the protective walls. We realized the gods of wood and stone were just made by human hands, and so we proudly smashed them. But in our intellectual arrogance, we totally missed the crucial psychological purpose those symbols served. We essentially destroyed the ancient containers that kept the chaotic forces of the collective unconscious at bay.
And so, stripped of those protective mythological walls, modern humanity is now facing a completely barren, waterless spiritual landscape. We are wide open, entirely exposed to all the dangers of the deep mind. This spiritual poverty has left us with an alarming, pervasive loss of meaning in the modern world.
Jung actually points out that, out of sheer desperation, Westerners will often try to adopt Eastern symbols or exotic spiritual practices. But it's kind of like a beggar wrapping himself in a king's raiment, right? These borrowed garments don't truly fit our specific historical development. So ultimately, we're just left spiritually naked. This spiritual poverty leads directly to a really profound internal shift. Basically, our pure intellect usurped the spirit, forcing it to descend from its fiery heights all the way down to the heavy, instinct-driven waters of nature. For centuries, people thought of the spirit as something elevated, soaring far above the sordid, messy earth, constantly seeking deliverance. But our modern, earthborn intellect acted like a heavy hammer, driving that soaring spirit downward. It became weighed down, descending deep into the physical, instinctual depths of the psyche. So, to reclaim our lost spiritual heritage, you and I have to follow this exact descent ourselves. We have to purposefully leave the dry, barren intellect behind and take a journey down into the mysterious, dark waters of the psyche together. Jung explains that anyone in serious search of their lost inner heritage absolutely must take this plunge. It's very much like that beautiful Gnostic myth of the son who bravely dives into a pitch-black Egyptian well, literally risking everything just to retrieve a single glowing lost pearl. Jung actually illustrates this precise metaphorical descent through the recurring dream of a Protestant theologian. In this dream, the man approaches a dark valley lake. Suddenly, everything grows incredibly uncanny. A cold gust of wind, representing the raw, unpredictable breath of the spirit, moves rapidly over the face of the water, and he is seized by absolute panic. Jung beautifully parallels this visceral fear to the Algonii tribe in Kenya. They speak of an nocturnal god, this shadowy maker of fear that creeps in like a cold gust of wind, rustling through the tall grass in the dead of night. Make no mistake, spontaneous, unmediated encounters with the deepest parts of the unconscious are inherently terrifying to our naive, waking minds. In Jung's analysis, water isn't just a figure of speech here. It is the literal, terrifying, but ultimately deeply healing substance of the deep mind. It represents the spirit that has become fully unconscious. It's the earthy, instinct-driven body, that dense realm of carnality and primitive drives. Now, on one hand, it threatens to drown us. But on the other, just like the biblical pool of Bethesda, where an angel periodically stirs the water to give it miraculous healing powers, this descent into our own murky depths is the absolute, indispensable condition for any true spiritual healing. You simply cannot be healed without getting wet. But here's the catch. When you finally look into the mirror of this dark water, you first have to face your own shadow. And this is a grueling, uncompromising test of courage. Standing there at the edge of the water, you can no longer project your negative traits, your flaws, and your darkest impulses onto your environment or onto other people. The water aggressively strips away the persona. That polished, socially acceptable mask of the actor that you wear every single day. And in its reflection, it forces you to confront your own profound helplessness and ineffectuality. It is a really tight, excruciatingly painful door to squeeze through. And honestly, it's exactly why most people entirely refuse to ever look inward. Now, if you do survive that narrow, painful door of the shadow, you sink into a boundless, oceanic expanse. There's no inside or outside here, no clear good and no absolute bad. You shift away from the isolating cerebrospinal system, the brain and spinal cord, that literally and conceptually separate you from the external world. Instead, you sink down into the sympathetic nervous system. Think about it. This is the ancient biological system governing your gut feelings, your automatic rhythms, those physical processes that seamlessly connect you to the broader pulse of nature. In this deep, autonomic realm, you are intimately connected to absolutely everything. You become the object of every subject. In this boundless, watery realm, the self truly becomes the world. So, to cope with that overwhelming vastness, humans instinctively use protective structures to keep from drowning in all that chaos. Back in 1916, Jung himself painted this exact mandala. Just like historical figures such as the renowned Swiss mystic Brother Klaus, Jung used these intricate protective circles as a powerful antidote. When the pure, unadulterated force of the collective unconscious breaches the walls of our rational mind, the mandala steps in. It acts as a compass, structuring the chaos, organizing the terrifying infinite, and ultimately restoring our vital psychic balance. Because without these protective circles, the ultimate danger of the collective unconscious is that it will simply roll over your fragile consciousness like a massive tidal wave, entirely dissolving your ego. Ancient humans were right on the money when they called this the perils of the soul, the terrifying risk of forgetting who you are, becoming completely lost in yourself, and being possessed by uncontrolled, primitive emotions. When our protective cultural symbols and dogmas fail, the deep waters rise, and if we aren't prepared to navigate them, these inner psychological catastrophes can break over humanity with absolutely devastating force, sweeping the individual completely away.
As we finally wrap up our descent today, I want to leave you sitting with this final thought. The treasures of the deep really do await at the bottom of the well. They hold the vital keys to our shared, ancient human legacy and, honestly, to our future healing. But to claim them, you have to bypass the comfort of your dry intellect and face your own dark shadow. So ask yourself, honestly, do you have the courage to face what stares back from the water? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks a new, courageous journey into your own depths.